Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member. If the last 3 years has taught us anything, it's that a robust and resilient supply chain is essential to our economic and national security. Now, last week, this subcommittee heard from the Federal Maritime Commission and the Maritime Administration on the fiscal year 2024 budget request and the implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. Today, we'll hear from industry representatives on how they think implementation of these laws is going and what more we can do to prevent disruption to our supply chain in the future. There was no better demonstration of the supply chain backlog during the COVID-19 pandemic than at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, although I think the Port of Everett came in a close second, where nearly 100 vessels were forced to idle offshore. However, the problem was nationwide, and the Puget Sound saw more vessels seeking anchorage than ever before. As imported goods were in high demand, carriers rushed to return containers, often empty, to Asia so they could be loaded again. Meanwhile, U.S. companies struggled to obtain cargo space at a reasonable price and in a timely manner, which meant their exports, often perishable, languished landside. The icing on the cake was when they were given a bill for unfair and unreasonable detention and demurrage fees as a result of a situation over which they had no control. Thankfully, a bipartisan Congress and President Biden moved quickly to address the supply chain crisis, passing historic legislation like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. Included in the BIL was $6.5 billion exclusively for ports and $27 billion that ports would be eligible for. The creation of the Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force and the Freight Logistics Optimization Works Initiative, or the FLOW Initiative, optimize funding for ports to improve supply chain fluidity and increase coordination among every link of the supply chain. Since the passage of OSRA, the FMC has moved quickly to establish a process for accepting, investigating, and adjudicating charge complaints, update regulations on penalties, and issue a final rule on detention and demurrage. The pandemic made clear the need for investments in maritime infrastructure. Maritime commerce is a significant contributor as well to global carbon emissions, and both the BIL and the Inflation Reduction Act demonstrate that targeted investments can improve resiliency in the maritime supply chain and reduce emissions. Investing in low or no emission technology at ports does not mean sacrificing efficiency. Projects like the Middle Harbor Terminal Zero Emission Conversion Project at the Port of Long Beach demonstrate that fact clearly. That project will lower emissions, create a more resilient port, and make the movement of cargo more efficient. This project funds the replacement of aging diesel tractors with electric tractors, construction of electric charging infrastructure, and installation of software equipment to streamline cargo handling operations. And Mr. Cordero, I look forward to hearing about this and other projects underway at the port. And despite the congestion we saw at the ports in 2021 and 22, one thing never slowed: the hardworking and dedicated longshore workers. They put in long hours each day to keep containers flowing, despite the constant threat of exposure to COVID-19 and a massive backlog of cargo waiting to be shipped. Our human infrastructure is critical to the U.S. economy, and I want to be clear that I think federal dollars should not be used to put longshore workers out of a job. The Port Infrastructure Development Program prohibits federal dollars from being used to eliminate jobs, and I'll work to ensure that prohibition remains. If we want to prevent the next supply chain crisis, we have to invest in ports. They serve as the gateway for international trade, and without modern infrastructure, our businesses, consumers, and communities are at risk. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on what they're doing and how the federal government can do to work with them to prevent another supply chain crisis. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carbajal, you're now recognized.